Hey guys, tonight we're diving mouth first into a topic that might make you clench your jaw a little tighter. The toothy tale of ancient Egyptian dental care. Picture this. You're trudging across the baked clay of an old Theban street, the morning sun already warming your sandals. Someone passes you, breath pungent enough to be declared a local curse, and you remember, it's time to clean your own teeth. But instead of reaching for minty freshness or electric toothbrushes, you grab a twig, a handful of powder made from crushed ox hooves, and if you're lucky, a rinse that smells like fermented onions. Welcome to oral hygiene, 14th century BCE style. You probably won't survive this routine without gagging at least once. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ancient Egyptians, for all their gold and glory, had absolutely dreadful teeth. Sure, their art showed them with those famous sphinx-like smiles, neat rows of pristine white. But once you peek inside the mummified jaws of nobles and commoners alike, you realize something horrifying. Nearly everyone had terrible dental health, cracked molars, worn enamel, rotten roots. It wasn't even rare, it was expected. And the main culprit? Bread. That's right. Their bread, what you might think of as the humble base of their diet, was so coarse it practically came pre-sprinkled with sand. The flour was ground using stone querns, which inevitably shed tiny particles into the meal. Over time, every bite of flatbread became a subtle mouthful of grit. Day by day, that grit wore down enamel like a desert wind carving stone. And unlike us, they didn't have fluoride rinses or hygienist cleanings to keep things in check. Imagine eating toast for every meal, but each slice comes with its own built-in dental exfoliant. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians were even aware of this dental erosion or simply accepted it as a fact of life. What's clear, though, is that by middle age, many had teeth ground flat to the gum line, like worn-out pebbles. You, standing in that bustling market square, probably reach up and feel your own teeth, relieved that none of them are embedded with quartz flakes. But if you were Egyptian, you might not be so lucky. The pain, constant. The infection risk, enormous. And yet, they still smiled in statues. Maybe they were just too tired to frown, and don't even think about modern dentists. Those weren't really a thing, at least not how we know them. Your best bet was a priest, who also dabbled in what we now consider questionable medical practices. Maybe he'd offer a spell to soothe the pain, or smear a salve of animal fat and ash across your jaw. Helpful. Debatable. Appetizing? Absolutely not. Still, they were a clever bunch. Papyrus texts describe various remedies for toothaches, gum swelling, and even loose teeth. One suggested applying a paste made of ground beans, incense, and honey. Another involved dried lizard powder. You really have to wonder what poor soul volunteered for that clinical trial. And don't forget, Egyptian society placed huge importance on cleanliness. They bathed, perfumed, oiled, and shaved more often than most modern gym-goers, which makes their dental neglect all the more surprising. Maybe it wasn't neglect, though. Maybe they just didn't have the tools, or the surviving enamel, to do much more than react to the pain when it came. Even the wealthy weren't spared. In fact, royalty might have had it worse. With more access to sweets and wine, elite diets accelerated tooth decay. Archaeologists once examined a mummy of a noblewoman whose breath must have cleared entire banquet halls. Her molars were cracked down the middle, with visible abscesses that had bored holes through the bone. And yes, she was buried with her favorite perfume, possibly as a kindness to the next world. One fun tidbit that's still debated: whether some of the ancient Egyptian beauty treatments were actually doubling as dental hacks. Malachite, a green mineral used in eye makeup, has mild antibacterial properties. Could it have been applied to the gums too? Historians still argue whether that was deliberate or just a fabulous accident. So, as you sit back and relax, let's set the stage. You, in a long linen tunic, standing by the Nile with a twig in hand, hoping to scrub off yesterday's date and beer mash. You're ready to learn how the ancients cleaned their teeth, and why you definitely shouldn't try this at home. You start your day like any good ancient Egyptian, with a piece of bread so rough it could probably sand down a wooden boat. It's warm from the morning sun and packed with nutrition, or so the priests say. But the moment it touches your teeth, you realize it's also packed with something else. Grit. Actual, literal grit. This is no flaky croissant or soft sourdough. This is survival bread. The flour was ground by hand on limestone, or granite slabs called querns, and every batch picked up flecks of stone in the process. So, with every bite, you're slowly polishing your molars into little nubs. Over time, enamel just vanishes like a pyramid swallowed by the desert. And unfortunately, you have no idea what enamel even is. Historians still argue whether Egyptians were aware that their bread was actively destroying their teeth. Some think it was just an accepted hardship of daily life, like sandstorms or dealing with your neighbor's noisy donkey. Others suggest more careful milling was reserved for the wealthy, who could afford less abrasive flour. But even the tombs of the elite show skulls worn down to the jaw. In ancient Egypt, a smile was never just a smile. It was a grim record of your diet. And oh, how bread was central to everything. Not just food, but also currency. You were often paid in loaves. You gave offerings in loaves. You even got married over loaves. It's kind of romantic, until you realize those wedding vows probably included a clause about shared toothaches. The roughness didn't stop with the bread either. Many meals included beer, unfiltered, cloudy, and thick like gritty soup. And surprise, it also had sand in it. That's because beer mash was stored in large clay pots, and the clay chipped. So, with every sip, more microparticles joined the party, dancing a terrible conga line across your gums. Let's imagine this for a second. You wake up, you choose some stone bread. You wash it down with sand beer. You grin at a friend, and they wince because your smile looks like a crumbling temple wall. Not exactly the pearly whites of your average toothpaste ad. To combat this wear and tear, Egyptians did try their hand at dental care. Chewing sticks, primitive brushes, and various powders were all in use, but none could reverse the damage done by daily meals that doubled as mild abrasives. Archaeological remains tell the tale better than any scribe. X-rays of mummies reveal jaws riddled with abscesses, deep cavities, and bone infections. One nobleman had so many dental issues that scientists believe he may have died from blood poisoning caused by oral bacteria. And still, he was buried with a little sack of bread, just in case the afterlife served soup. You might think kids had it better, being spared the decades of tooth abuse. Nope. Even children's remains show signs of enamel wear by their teenage years. Baby teeth barely had time to grow in before they were being filed down by breakfast. One of the more ironic facts is that the ancient Egyptian diet was otherwise quite healthy. Lots of vegetables, fruits, legumes, and fish. They knew about fiber and didn't have processed sugar. But their teeth were still a battlefield, thanks to their tools and methods of preparation. Imagine eating organic kale that's been tumbled in gravel. That's basically the vibe. Some fringe theories suggest that Egyptians may have believed dental pain was spiritual in nature, sent by gods or evil spirits. A rotten molar could be seen as a sign of moral impurity, or even the work of angry ancestors. So while you're walking around with a swollen cheek and a pounding jaw, you're also wondering if you forgot to thank Thoth yesterday. And yet, despite all this, their culture thrived for millennia. Maybe they got used to it. Maybe the pain was simply background noise to the greater performance of life beside the Nile. Or maybe, just maybe, their secret was distraction, chanting, rituals, family gossip, and dreaming about the next life, where, hopefully, the bread was softer. So tonight, as you lie back with modern teeth brushed by soft bristled brushes and toothpaste that tastes like a mojito, give thanks that you weren't born into a time when every meal doubled as dental sandpaper. Your enamel is still intact. Your dentist probably uses gloves, and your beer? Filtered. Still, as you drift off, try to imagine the scrape of sand between your molars, the faint crunch that shouldn't be there, and the gentle hum of a Nile breeze. It's not comfortable, but it's oddly soothing to know just how far we've come from chewing our way through breakfast with geological enthusiasm. You're halfway through your morning in ancient Egypt, and your mouth already feels like someone lined your gums with gravel. The flatbread has done its usual number on your molars, and that mug of beer, yes, beer for breakfast, did nothing to soothe the damage. In fact, it probably added a new layer of sediment. You might think, surely someone noticed this was a problem? And the answer is, yes. But solving it? That's where things get crunchy. Tooth decay was more than just an inconvenience in ancient Egypt. It was a full-blown societal epidemic. Mummies of every class, from peasant to pharaoh, show signs of dental disaster. Abscesses, impacted molars, exposed roots, and cracked teeth. And yet, despite their astonishing achievements in architecture, astronomy, and medicine, they never quite cracked the dental code. One of the more sobering facts is that Egyptians had no concept of sugar the way we do, yet they still suffered from rampant cavities. Their bread was coarse, yes, but they also loved dried fruits, dates, honey, and wine. All natural, all sweet, and all incredibly good at feeding the bacteria that cause tooth decay. That means you, ancient listener, might end your lunch with a lovely fig, only to spend your night with a pounding jaw and a slight fever. Historians still argue whether they truly understood the connection between diet and decay. Some scrolls suggest a link between certain foods and pain, but there's no direct evidence they knew bacteria even existed. So when your mouth started to hurt, you didn't reach for mouthwash. You reached for prayer, or something far worse. Let's say you're a mid-level scribe and your canine has begun to ache. You try rinsing it with cold Nile water. Bad idea. The parasites alone could start a side quest. Then maybe a paste of powdered barley and cumin, mixed with whatever else the local healer swears by. And when that fails, you might visit a temple priest who chants to drive the toothworm away. Yes, the toothworm. That mythical little beastie that ancient cultures all over the world blame for toothaches. It burrowed in your teeth, causing pain, swelling, and infection, or so they thought. The Egyptians weren't alone in this belief. Babylonians, Chinese, and even early Europeans passed around versions of this idea, like it was dental gospel. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians imagined the worm as literal or symbolic, but some relief treatments were designed to smoke it out or starve it. Picture it, lying on a woven reed mat while someone burns a concoction of onion skins and incense near your open mouth, whispering invocations and fanning the air to coax out an invisible squatter in your molars. There's no numbing gel, no sterile gloves, Just hope, smoke, and a whole lot of faith. And even if the pain subsides, the infection likely doesn't. In the worst cases, abscesses could grow so large that they formed visible swellings along the jaw. In mummified remains, these present as pockets of pus locked in time. Some skulls even show signs of the infection eating into bone, a condition that in today's world requires immediate surgery. You'd think, with all the gods they prayed to, someone might have specialized in molars. But dental care was more or less a subset of general medicine, which itself was a blend of practical remedies and spiritual rituals. A healer might recite an incantation over a paste of crushed mouse bones and myrrh, apply it to your gum, and leave you to rest in peace, which in this context might have had a darker undertone. And the pain wasn't subtle. In a society where people lived into their 30s and 40s on average, dental disease could turn your last years into a miserable countdown of throbbing pain and silent suffering. Especially since Egyptian culture valued stoicism. Complaining? Not cool. You were expected to endure in quiet dignity. Smile through it, even if your teeth looked like cracked limestone blocks. But here's the twist. Despite the agony, the Egyptians didn't see their bad teeth as a failure of hygiene. They saw it as part of life's balance. Mayat. Everything in the universe had its order, and decay was simply part of being human. You were born, you lived, you chewed on granite bread. You died. Hopefully with a few molars still in place. That worldview is oddly calming. There's no frantic obsession with perfect white smiles, no rows of electric toothbrushes, no celebrity-endorsed toothpaste. Just you, your twig brush, and the quiet knowledge that yes, your mouth hurts, but so does everyone else's. So tonight, as you lie still and feel your jaw soften, imagine the warm breeze of the Nile drifting through your hut. You hold a bit of papyrus to your cheek, hoping the cool reed will numb the swelling. Outside, someone's chanting, and in the distance, temple bells echo off sandstone walls. Maybe your tooth still throbs, maybe it doesn't. Either way, you close your eyes and dream of figs that don't bite back. By now you've gnawed your way through ancient Egyptian breakfast and braved the toothache that came with it. But here's the thing. There's no dentist's office waiting for you with clean gloves and a numb smile. Instead, if things get bad enough, really, swollen face, can't sleep, pus leaking bad, your only hope is someone who knows how to embalm the dead. Yes, in ancient Egypt, the person most likely to poke around inside your mouth wasn't a dentist at all. It was someone more familiar with pickling corpses than preserving smiles. And weirdly, that overlap made perfect sense. After all, both jobs required knowledge of anatomy, tools for cutting, and a strong stomach. Let's say you're desperate enough. You drag yourself to one of these temple-affiliated healers. They aren't formally trained like modern doctors, but they've got scrolls with half-legible recipes, a toolkit of dubious instruments, and years of helping people survive long enough to die of something worse. And most importantly, they've worked on mummies, so they know their way around the human jaw, sort of. Historians still argue whether these early practitioners understood the purpose of the procedures they attempted. Some skulls show evidence of surgical scraping or tooth removal, while others hint at rudimentary drilling. But were they trying to relieve pressure from abscesses? Remove decay? Or were they just guessing? We don't know for sure. What we do know is that some patients survived, which is honestly a miracle considering anesthesia at the time consisted of hold still and bite this. And sometimes, their help came too late. In many tombs, archaeologists have found teeth wrapped in linen alongside the dead, perhaps removed before burial, or perhaps yanked out in life and kept as a souvenir. It's hard to say, but if someone's jaw was too infected, the embalmer's work might begin early. Pain, infection, rot. It all blurred the line between healing the living and preparing the dead. Imagine lying there in the faint light of an oil lamp, the scent of frankincense and rotting herbs clogging the air. A sharp bronze tool hovers near your mouth, wielded by a man in a leopard skin sash who just finished stuffing sawdust into someone's chest cavity. You flinch. He mutters something about a crocodile god. You regret everything. One particularly haunting case involved a noblewoman whose skull showed an abscess the size of a plum. Her jawbone had been partially removed post-mortem, possibly as part of embalming, possibly to treat the infection while she was still breathing. Either way, it didn't end well. She was buried with her mouth slightly open, as if even in death, the pain hadn't fully left her. And don't go thinking this is just upper-class horror. Even laborers weren't spared. In worker tombs near Deir el-Medina, bodies reveal identical dental horrors. These were the folks building Pharaoh's tombs, hauling stone under brutal sun, and doing it all while battling mouth infections. It's one thing to carve a pyramid with a chisel. It's another to do it while your gums ooze. You might expect a bit of irony in this. After all, this is the same civilization that gave us breathtaking gold masks, perfect geometric tombs, and perfume recipes so good we still try to replicate them. Yet when it came to oral care, they were stabbing around in the dark with copper needles and honey-soaked linen. But still, you've got to admire their commitment. They tried. They mixed up pastes. They recited spells. They swished with wine. Some even rubbed powdered lapis lazuli on their gums, possibly thinking it held divine healing properties. Or maybe they just wanted their teeth to sparkle in the torchlight. Style points count too. There's a charming resilience in it all, a willingness to poke at the unknown, to try whatever might bring relief. Even if it involved laying back and letting someone who specializes in stuffing corpses pour onion juice into your open cavity while chanting to Anubis. So tonight, as your head sinks into your pillow, imagine lying on a woven mat, your jaw swollen like a melon, and the only man who can help also keeps his tools next to the ones he uses on mummies. And yet, you let him try. Because pain is pain, and hope, however slim, is still worth a mouthful of mystery paste. At some point, desperation leads you to agree to what is easily the worst idea of your short, sand-ridden life. Allowing someone to smear a homemade concoction of honey, ground mouse bones, and mashed onion on your throbbing gums. You're not hallucinating. That's a real recipe, taken straight from the medical papyri of ancient Egypt. And yes, you put it in your mouth willingly. There's a whole category of these bizarre dental pastes documented in various scrolls, some more dubious than others. One particularly memorable remedy involved burning the tail of a lizard into ash, mixing it with milk, and rubbing it on the affected tooth. No one ever explains why the tail had to be burned separately. Historians still argue whether these mixtures were symbolic, placebo-based, or actually intended to be medicinal. But one thing is certain, they're absolutely disgusting. The worst offender? A widely cited mixture that included honey, powdered incense, cumin, and bits of dried mouse. Yes, dried mouse. Either these folks had an odd sense of dental bravery, or they were willing to try absolutely anything to stop the pain. Probably both. You're sitting there with a toothache that's pulsing like a drum solo, and some guy with a painted linen robe tells you to rub a bit of rodent paste on it and wait for Ra's mercy. What choice do you have? Honey at least had some merit. It's antibacterial, and incense. Maybe antimicrobial, but the rest? Fringe at best. This is what passes for dental science in the land of obelisks and scarab amulets. You lean back on your reed mat, and the healer applies the paste with a little stick. Your whole face smells like a temple fire. There's a mild tingling sensation that could be pain relief, or just your nerve endings giving up. And while no one's taking notes or checking for follow-up appointments, this is your best shot at feeling normal again. Interestingly, Egyptians did write down these treatments with incredible seriousness. The Ebers Papyrus, for example, contains dozens of medical remedies, including plenty for dental ailments. These weren't scribbled down by bored farmers. They were scribed by professional healers and temple scribes, stored in libraries for future reference. Medicine, even bizarre medicine, was serious business. And while you're lying there, mouse gum mixture slowly leaking down your throat, you begin to notice something. Your fellow patients aren't laughing. They aren't questioning. They're nodding respectfully at the healer, thanking him for his wisdom. Because to them, this is as advanced as it gets. The line between medicine and magic is so thin, it might as well be painted on papyrus with crocodile ink. Sometimes they threw a prayer into the mix. May Sekhmet grant you pain relief, or may your molars feel the peace of the Nile. You don't know if it helps, but the rhythmic chanting and fragrant smoke do lull you into a sort of haze. Maybe the smell of burning herbs masks the underlying rodent funk. Maybe the placebo effect is finally doing its thing. There's something poetic in all of this. Even surrounded by bizarre ingredients and questionable hygiene, the Egyptians believed deeply in healing. They combined every scrap of knowledge they had, herbal, spiritual, and anatomical, and tried to push back against the inevitable tide of decay. You, lying under a canopy of palm leaves, might not know whether you're healing or hallucinating, but at least you're not alone. Somewhere nearby, someone else is probably smearing a cat hair compress on a sore elbow and hoping for the best. And hey, every now and then, something worked. Some of their remedies, when tested by modern researchers, show signs of genuine medicinal potential. Others are, frankly, just weird soup. But even the weird soup came with good intentions. So tonight, as you drift deeper into relaxation, imagine that you're in a quiet courtyard at dusk, the air thick with incense and crushed herbs. A small bowl of mystery paste sits beside you, and a sleepy chant murmurs in the background. You lean back, the pain subsiding just slightly, and wonder if the gods accept mouse bones as copay. After your latest brush with onion honey mouse medicine, you might think things couldn't get weirder. But oh, they do. Because now we're stepping into the shinier, fancier side of Egyptian oral hygiene, the luxury of gold toothpicks. Yes, while most people were chewing on palm twigs or gnawing through their daily sandstone sandwich, the wealthy had options, like custom-carved gold implements designed to pick food from between worn-down teeth. It's the ancient equivalent of flossing with jewelry, and it tells you something fascinating about Egyptian priorities. Even when their mouths were a disaster zone, they still aimed to do it in style. Archaeologists have uncovered these delicate metal toothpicks in tombs, often among other personal grooming tools like tweezers, kohl applicators, and fancy razors. Many were tucked into tiny toiletry kits, little pouches or boxes kept beside the deceased as part of their afterlife prep. Because nothing says ready for eternity like being able to remove celery strings with a solid gold stick. And while gold was the high-end material, toothpicks were also made from bone, ivory, or even copper. They weren't just practical, they were status symbols. To carry a metal toothpick, especially one ornately decorated, was to show the world you had wealth, taste, and, probably, a whole lot of impacted food. Now, whether these tools were actually used by the living or created solely as burial items is still up for debate. Historians still argue whether they were functioning hygiene tools or purely symbolic representations of cleanliness and care in the next life. Either way, they existed, and they show that even in a time before toothpaste, Egyptians took oral grooming very seriously, especially if they could flex while doing it. Let's imagine you're wealthy now. You're reclining on a carved wooden chair in your courtyard, sipping fermented fig wine, and after nibbling on some candied lotus root, your treat of the week, you produce your golden pick with a practiced flick. Across the garden, someone sees the glint and thinks, now that's someone who has their life and gums together. Of course, there's a practical limit to the help these tools could provide. Remember, your teeth are still flat from years of chewing gritty bread. Your breath could probably peel paint, and you may or may not have a healing mousebone poultice drying between two molars. But the toothpick, that's presentation. That's class. Interestingly, these grooming tools were often considered an extension of personal identity. Egyptians believed strongly in presenting the body with care and cleanliness, not just in life, but in death. This is why we see so many mummies wrapped with jewelry, makeup, and yes, dental implements. Imagine being buried in a fine linen shroud, clutching your favorite bronze tooth scraper, ready to meet Osiris with a freshish smile. They even had miniature mirrors, sometimes made from polished obsidian or metal, which means someone probably stood in dim torchlight, squinting into a reflection and doing their best to extract ancient kale from their back teeth, using something shinier than your high school class ring. And it wasn't just for solo grooming. These tools might have played a role in rituals or preparations before big events, festivals, feasts, even funerals. You don't want to show up to honor the gods with barley stuck in your smile after all. Cleanliness was sacred. And while that didn't translate into modern dental science, it did shape their culture's rituals around grooming and appearance. There's even evidence suggesting toothpicks were worn on necklaces, like charm pendants, dual-purpose fashion and function. One glance down, and there it is. Your emergency tooth spear, ready to save you, mid-meal. Tonight, picture yourself lying on cool stone under an open sky, the stars blinking softly above you, and beside your bedroll, nestled in a box of amulets and combs, is your golden toothpick. Maybe you used it today, maybe not. But its quiet glint reminds you that even in a world of crushed stone bread and spicy abscess poultices, elegance still had a place. You wake up to the sound of temple bells and the rustle of reeds in the morning breeze, and your jaw feels like it hosted a family of jackals overnight. The pain is back, creeping like a sandstorm through your molars. So, you do what any sensible ancient Egyptian would do. You go see the priest. Now, before you imagine a serene figure in robes quietly brewing herbal tea, let's reset expectations. This priest is equal parts philosopher, mystic, part-time doctor, and full-time channeler of crocodile gods. And today, his job is to soothe your aching mouth with a blend of ceremony, herbal fumigation, and if all else fails, supernatural threats. In ancient Egypt, medicine was often inseparable from religion. Temples weren't just for worship. They were centers of healing. Priests maintained the libraries of medical scrolls, performed rituals, and administered treatments that straddled the blurry line between medicine and magic. And when it came to dental pain, that meant invoking divine intervention just as much as applying smelly salves. The temple courtyard is a calming place, if you ignore the fact that you're here because your tooth feels like it's being pried out by Horus himself. The priest begins by examining your face, tapping lightly around your jaw, and muttering under his breath. He may reference one of the gods associated with healing, Thoth for wisdom, Sekhmet for power, or even Sobek, the crocodile deity, known for his aggressive protection and sharp teeth. Because sure, Who better to cure a dental emergency than a creature with 60 of them? Historians still argue whether these priests truly believed in the magical elements of their treatments, or whether the rituals were designed more as comfort theater, something to calm the patient's mind while the body struggled through the pain. Regardless, the process was elaborate. He hands you a reed scroll and instructs you to read a charm aloud, something about banishing the mouth demons and restoring harmony to your bite. The words are old, sacred, and slightly terrifying. The next step, burning resin in a small ceramic pot. The smoke smells sharp and earthy, and as it curls toward your face, the priest wafts it directly toward your open mouth. Whether this is supposed to heal you or just scare the bacteria away is unclear. Then comes the application of a sacred paste. You try not to ask what's in it, but you catch the scent of garlic, crushed carob, and something that might be animal marrow. He applies it using a carved wooden spoon, pressing it gently into the side of your gum. It hurts. You cry a little. He nods, which you assume means the pain is proof it's working. Sometimes he'll draw a protective symbol on your cheek, perhaps an ankh or an eye of Horus, meant to ward off further affliction. And sometimes, if the pain has lingered too long, he might suggest you sleep with a charm under your pillow. Not a soft, fluffy charm, a stone one, possibly engraved with the image of a god who bites back. To modernize, all of this feels strange, but to you, it's a legitimate path to healing. This priest knows the old ways. He reads scrolls, he speaks with gods, he mixes poultices that shimmer oddly in the light. And if you're lucky, maybe tomorrow your jaw won't feel like it's been cursed by Set himself. You're sent home with instructions. Rinse with wine, sleep facing east, avoid figs for 3 days, and don't speak unkind words lest the pain return. It's a lot to remember for someone with half a mouthful of agony, but you nod politely. After all, he might also handle burials, and you don't want to end up on the wrong side of his client list. So tonight, as you curl under your linen sheet, the smell of burnt resin still lingering in your hair, you clutch your carved charm and hope the smoke, the chant, and the spoonful of garlic paste are enough to appease whatever ancient force is chewing on your molars. And somewhere far off, maybe deep inside the temple walls, another patient groans. The priest hums a low, sacred melody. The gods look on, their carved stone faces unblinking. Eventually, when chants and pastes and golden picks fail to deliver you from dental purgatory, someone brings up a word that makes even the bravest scribe tremble. Drilling. Yes, drilling, without anesthetic. Without sterilization. Without warning, really. There's limited evidence that ancient Egyptians occasionally, very occasionally, attempted primitive forms of dental surgery, including drilling holes into teeth to relieve pressure from abscesses or decay. And if that sounds terrifying, it's because it absolutely was. Historians still argue whether these procedures were truly surgical or more symbolic. Some scholars point to small holes found in molars from ancient remains, arguing that they might be the result of therapeutic intervention, basically an attempt to vent infected teeth. Others think the holes could be post-mortem, a result of burial rituals or even looting. But there's enough tantalizing evidence to suggest that, at least in a few cases, someone tried something daring. Dentistry by force. Let's walk through this nightmarish possibility. You've been suffering for days. Your jaw is swollen, your eye twitches every time you chew, and the priest's garlic-rubbed mouse bones didn't help. Then someone, maybe a temple healer, maybe a bone setter, maybe your neighbor who dabbled in copperwork, offers to relieve the pressure. You lie back on a mat. There's no pillow, just sand-packed linen. He places a folded cloth in your mouth and tells you to bite. Not for comfort, but so you don't scream your tongue off. He pulls out a hand drill. Yes, a bow-style drill used mostly for wood or beadwork, and begins positioning it against your tooth. You begin to reconsider every choice that led to this moment. The drill is turned slowly, steadily, like churning butter, but with way more nerve endings involved. Sparks don't fly, but pain certainly does. It's unclear whether the person operating the drill knows what he's doing, but he mutters something about balance and nods at the gods, which doesn't exactly boost your confidence. There's a strange sensation, pressure, then release. The side of your face feels hot, then oddly cool. You taste blood, stone dust, and something vaguely herbal. He rinses your mouth with sour wine, pats your shoulder, and declares the procedure a success. Did it work? Maybe. There's a chance the pressure has been relieved. There's also a chance the tooth will fall out tomorrow, and your jaw will swell twice as large. But at least for the moment, the pain has dulled to a tolerable throb. In modern terms, this is the equivalent of playing dental roulette with a stick and a prayer. But for the Egyptians, it was an act of bravery, or desperation, or divine faith, often all three. We've found burial remains with signs of these drilled teeth, and while not common, they suggest someone somewhere said, "Let's try putting a hole in it and see what happens." And isn't that the history of medicine in a nutshell? Curiously, there are even stories, though likely exaggerated, of tooth jewelry being added to drilled holes. Tiny inlays of stone or metal inserted as decoration, or maybe as a status symbol. Whether this was dental fashion or a desperate attempt to plug a cavity, no one's entirely sure. Historians still debate if those were functional or just ornamental accidents, but the idea of someone turning a painful molar into an aesthetic statement? That's very on-brand for ancient Egypt. So as you drift off tonight, imagine lying on cool stone, mouth aching, but slightly less so, staring up at the painted ceiling of your chamber. You survived the drill, maybe even gained a new story to tell, though probably with a noticeable whistle through your front teeth. Outside, the Nile flows steadily. Someone sings a lullaby to a cranky baby. And inside, you run your tongue gently over the tooth that once tried to kill you. It's still there, sort of. The pain may have eased, but now you're left with something even more perplexing. A little molar, sitting in a clay dish by your bedside. It came out during last night's drilling incident, or maybe it gave up and jumped ship on its own. Either way, there it is. Grayish, jagged, and oddly solemn. You pick it up, unsure what to do next. Congratulations. You've officially met the world's first bad tooth fairy. In ancient Egypt, there wasn't exactly a fairy sneaking in to swap your tooth for coins. Instead, losing a tooth was either a moment of spiritual significance or something to be immediately dealt with in a practical or deeply odd manner. For many, the tooth wasn't discarded. It was buried, wrapped, or kept with other personal items. Sometimes it was burned, sometimes it was worn as a charm, and sometimes it just sat there in a dish like yours, waiting for someone to decide whether it still had purpose. Egyptians believed in the importance of bodily integrity. You wanted to enter the afterlife whole, teeth included. So if one fell out, it wasn't always seen as a sign to toss it aside. In some cases, they may have tried to preserve it for burial. A little molar passport for your journey through the duat, the realm of the dead. Historians still argue whether teeth were actually stored with the body out of superstition or ritual habit. But the fact remains, they show up in tombs often enough to raise eyebrows. Some people reportedly tied lost teeth into linen bundles, adding them to their jewelry or amulet pouches. Imagine a necklace with little ivory-colored beads that are, in fact, your own former smile. It's sentimental in a way, unsettling, sure, but also kind of touching. The ancient version of keeping your baby teeth in a box under the bed. Except in this case, it might also protect your soul. One particularly eerie practice involved leaving the lost tooth in a sacred place, like under a statue of a healing god. The idea was that the deity might restore the lost part of you in the afterlife. It's a comforting notion if you're the spiritual type, though a little unnerving if you're staring at a crumbling canine that once helped you chew barley cakes. And there's more. In certain magical spells from the medical papyri, the pain of a tooth, or its removal, was symbolically transferred to an object. A clay figurine, a tied reed, a bead. The logic was, take the pain from the body and give it form elsewhere. Leave that object in a sacred location, and poof, the pain doesn't come back. You, lying there with your face half numbed by fermented wine, clutching a doll with a black dot drawn where the mouth should be, probably don't question it. You're just glad it's not hurting anymore. Then there's the darker possibility. Some teeth may have been used in rituals of revenge or warding. Folk belief held that pieces of the body, hair, nails, teeth, retained spiritual energy. You didn't want someone to get a hold of your lost tooth and cast a spell on it. Which meant part of your recovery involved either hiding it, burning it, or entrusting it to someone very, very trustworthy. Not your cousin, who gossips. Someone sacred. Like your cat, maybe. It's a weird moment, this silent connection with your own tooth. You hold it up to the firelight. It's ugly, damaged, and surprisingly heavy, but it's a part of you. And now, not quite knowing what else to do, you wrap it in linen and place it under your headrest. If nothing else, you want to keep the gods on your side. So tonight, as the fire crackles low and shadows flicker along the wall, you drift off with that little fragment of yourself tucked nearby. Who knows? Maybe in the field of reeds, the Egyptian heaven, you'll smile again, and all your teeth will be there, strong, whole, and sand-free. No paste. No drills, just soft fruit and laughter under the sun. You wake with a stiff jaw, but strangely, you feel a bit lighter. Maybe it's the fact that one of your more rebellious teeth finally left the premises. Or maybe it's because you've committed fully to this ancient Egyptian dental life, mouse paste and all. Either way, today's new practice, involves a mouth rinse that absolutely nobody should ever replicate. Mouthwash with a kick of urine. Yes, urine. Ancient Egyptians were resourceful. They believed that if a substance came from the body, it probably had power. Blood, sweat, tears, hair, all had spiritual and medical significance. And yes, that included urine. It was used in treatments for everything from skin infections to digestive issues. So of course someone at some point had the brilliant idea to swish with it. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or just an occasional ritual cleansing. But there are enough medical texts and interpretive clues to suggest it wasn't exactly rare. Combine that with other rinse ingredients like vinegar, wine, or mashed herbs, and you've got a brew that smells like a dare gone terribly wrong. Let's paint the picture. You're crouched over a basin. A healer pours in a bit of warm goat urine. Don't ask how it was collected, you don't want to know. Then adds myrrh, a dash of natron, basically powdered salt and ash, and some crushed mint. The mint is probably doing a lot of emotional heavy lifting in this recipe. You raise the bowl to your lips. The priest nods approvingly. The mixture smells like an alchemist's accident. You take a cautious sip and begin to swish. It burns. It tastes like regret. But after a few seconds, something incredible happens. Your mouth actually feels cleaner. That's the thing. Urine, particularly fresh and from a healthy individual or goat, contains ammonia, which has mild antiseptic properties. It's disgusting, yes, but it might have helped kill off some of the bacteria causing that persistent mouth rot. The ancient Egyptians didn't know about microbes, of course. But they noticed what worked, or at least what didn't immediately make things worse. They called these mixtures mouth purifiers. Some versions were more pleasant, involving only herbal rinses, frankincense, thyme, even aloe. Others were spiritual, involving chants and swishing under the full moon. But the strongest, most sacred versions? They came with the kind of ingredients you don't talk about at dinner. And it wasn't always swishing. Sometimes the rinse was heated and inhaled as steam. Other times, it was applied directly to the gums, using a cloth. Some healers even recommended sleeping with a linen bundle soaked in the stuff pressed to your jaw. You haven't known discomfort until you've had to fall asleep with what smells like pickled goat blanket taped to your face. Still, these rituals weren't just about health. They were about order. Cleanliness was a form of worship. To cleanse the mouth was to realign yourself with the gods, who valued purity in all forms. A foul breath was considered offensive, not just socially, but cosmically. You couldn't chant properly to the gods with a rotten molar. You couldn't pray if your breath chased away the altar incense. Some high priests even carried personal rinse kits. Archaeologists have uncovered small vessels with dried residue that, when tested, showed traces of sulfur, herbs, and ammonia compounds. Were they used daily? For rituals? Or as an emergency deodorizer before divine audience? Historians still debate their exact function, but one thing's clear: oral purification mattered. Tonight, as you lie back and try not to imagine the taste of fermented goat pee, think about the commitment it takes to keep going with these rituals. Your ancestors didn't give up after the first unpleasant swig. They endured, refined, and tried again, because pain relief, even the faintest glimmer of it, was worth the risk. And perhaps that's the lesson here. In the land of gold and granite, where bodies were preserved for eternity, but teeth didn't make it past 30, people still sought comfort. Even if it meant rinsing their mouths with things better left unnamed, so you exhale slowly. The firelight flickers. Your jaw aches less than it did. You whisper a prayer of thanks, not to the rinse, but to the mint. Because sometimes a leaf really does make all the difference. The taste of your last rinse still lingers faintly. Herbs, ash, and something best left unremembered. But don't get too comfortable, because your next brush with ancient Egyptian hygiene takes an unexpected detour through the makeup kit. That's right. Welcome to the intersection of oral care and ancient beauty, where you're about to smear powdered gemstones and animal fat on your face, and possibly your gums. To understand this strange overlap, we need to talk about malachite. Malachite was the go-to green pigment of ancient Egypt, crushed into fine powder and used primarily as eye makeup. Those vivid green streaks under the eyes in tomb paintings. That's malachite. But this striking mineral wasn't just about looks. It was also believed to have protective and healing properties. Egyptians thought it repelled illness and evil spirits, which made it a natural candidate for, well, everything. And yes, that includes dental treatments. Some medical scrolls mention green mineral powders being applied to swollen gums or cracked teeth. Historians still argue whether this was true malachite or just a similar-looking substitute. Either way, someone, at some point, rubbed sparkly rock powder onto an infected molar and said, "There, now both stylish and sterile." Malachite has mild antimicrobial properties, so this wasn't as wild as it sounds. And if you mix it with fat, maybe goose fat or ox marrow, you get a paste that's both sticky and luminous. It likely burned going on, but what didn't back then? You're starting to realize ancient Egyptian medicine wasn't about comfort, it was about conviction. Let's imagine the scene. You're sitting in a market square, jaw sore, and a street healer approaches with a little pot of shimmering green goo. She dabs a bit on your gums, mutters something to the goddess Hathor, protector of beauty and joy naturally, and tells you not to speak for an hour. You nod, then regret nodding, because it makes your jaw crackle, and it's not just malachite. Other minerals were in the mix too. Galena for eyeliner, natron for cleansing, red ochre for blush. Some of these doubled as cosmetic and medicinal tools. You've never lived until you've dabbed your toothache with the same stuff used to decorate royal cheekbones. This dual-use system extended to tools as well. That bronze pick you used earlier? It might have also been a coal applicator. The little spoon in your grooming kit? Useful for both stirring salves and pressing pigments onto eyelids. There was no bathroom drawer or separation between things that go near your eyes and things that go near your abscess. Everything was shared. Everything glinted. There's even evidence that the process of preparing makeup and medicinal pastes was done ritually. Grinding stones were blessed, the pigments purified by chance, and mixtures left in the sun to absorb life. You, kneeling under the morning sun with a goose fat and gem paste on your gums, might feel a little silly, but also, maybe, a little magical. And it wasn't just about healing. Appearance mattered. Egyptians valued cleanliness and presentation. A face smeared with gold dust and green streaks wasn't just beautiful, it was powerful. It announced your connection to the gods. It told the world that you were someone who took care of themselves, even if underneath the sparkle, your teeth were hanging on by threads. So tonight, as you stretch out beneath a linen canopy, your breath still tinged with myrrh and mystery minerals, try to picture that perfect balance of form and function. Your jaw still aches, but now it glimmers faintly in the firelight. You're in pain, sure, but you're fabulous. The Nile hums outside. Someone chants softly in the next room, and your cheeks shimmer. Your lips glow faintly green, and somewhere deep down, your molars, just for a moment, forget to throb. The pain flares again, just as you're drifting off. One of those hot, sharp stabs deep in the gum line that makes your entire face twitch. You sit up, groggy and annoyed, only to realize there's one treatment you haven't tried yet. Not a paste. Not a rinse. Not a golden pick. No, this time, you turn to the mystical arts. You're going to curse your toothache away. Ancient Egyptians didn't separate medicine from magic. They treated physical pain as a symptom of spiritual imbalance, divine displeasure, or even supernatural infestation. And when it came to dental pain, persistent, invisible, and maddening, it made perfect sense to turn to spells. Because what else could explain that kind of throbbing torment, especially when it refused to budge? One of the oldest recorded dental spells involves invoking a specific demon believed to dwell in the mouth. Not metaphorically, literally. According to the charm, the pain is caused by a malevolent spirit gnawing from within, and your job is to drive it out. With poetry, you recite an incantation passed down through generations, etched onto brittle papyrus or whispered from healer to healer. It goes something like, "O creature who lodges in the mouth of the sufferer, depart. May you be swallowed by the crocodile of the west and drowned in the basin of Hathor." It's oddly satisfying, angry, rhythmic. You're shaking a rattle carved with sacred symbols, waving incense through the air, and smacking a palm full of clay beside your head, because apparently startling the spirit helps. Whether it's the smoke, the sound, or just the drama of the moment, you feel a small wave of relief. Historians still argue whether these rituals had a measurable psychosomatic effect or were merely elaborate distraction techniques. But the Egyptians believed in their power. Entire temples were dedicated to healing rituals, and priests kept libraries of spells for every imaginable ailment, from headaches to heartbreak. And yes, even halitosis. Some of these incantations were paired with actions. For example, the spell might instruct you to tie a knot in a red string for each throb of pain, then bury the string near a sycamore tree, or place a carved ivory amulet under your tongue while chanting the names of 7 gods who all had suspiciously nice teeth. These gestures weren't empty theater. They were part of a broader system of belief, one in which suffering was seen as a rupture in divine balance, and healing was an act of spiritual restoration. You weren't just curing a molar. You were resetting the order of the cosmos, one chant at a time. Of course, sometimes the rituals got a little specific. One scroll describes creating a figurine of the tooth demon out of clay, painting it with red ochre, and then ceremonially smashing it to bits with a bronze pestle while reciting curses. It's part exorcism, part pottery class. And as you stand there, breathing heavily over a pile of shattered clay, you realize you feel better, or at least victorious. It helps that these rituals often involved community. Healing wasn't a solo journey. Friends, family, priests, and even random neighbors might join in, singing or clapping rhythmically. The atmosphere could feel almost festive, like a toothache-themed concert with smoke machines and chanting backup singers. And while nobody brings snacks, someone always has wine. Medicinal, of course. There's even a record of children being given small charms to wear, little carved crocodiles or eyes of Horus, meant to protect their developing teeth. Some scholars suggest parents whispered blessings over their babies' mouths as their first teeth came in, hoping to spare them future agony. You picture your younger self, chubby-cheeked and wide-eyed, blessed by candlelight before your first brush with barley bread. So now, lying on your woven mat, the last incense still curling in the air, and the tooth demon presumably fleeing toward the western horizon, you feel a little more whole. You didn't just treat your mouth, you defended your soul. Whether the pain returns or not, you'll be ready, rattle in hand, chant on lips, and a clay effigy of your next molar already half-formed. You close your eyes, and somewhere far away, in the dark sky above the Nile, the gods, probably, smile. The sun rises again, warm and golden over the horizon of the Nile, and you squint against the light, trying not to move your jaw too much. It's stiff, yes, but you survive the night. And in ancient Egypt, that's already a win. Still, you know what's coming. It's time for your daily brushing. No, not with a toothbrush. Those don't exist yet. Instead, you reach for your chewing stick, the ancient ancestor of dental tools, made from local twigs, most notably acacia wood. Acacia isn't just any old shrub. It has natural antiseptic and antimicrobial properties which may explain why Egyptians gravitated toward it. The ends of these sticks were chewed until they frayed into soft fibers, turning them into tiny fibrous brushes. You don't lather up any foam, of course, but after a few swipes and gentle chomps, you're technically scrubbing your teeth. Historians still argue whether Egyptians knew about the antiseptic properties of acacia or simply liked the taste and texture. Either way, it worked better than you'd expect, especially for a civilization thousands of years away from minty gel and tongue scrapers. And so, Like millions before you, you take your stick and begin the ritual. You chew, twist, and gently scrape your way through a morning routine that's at once earthy, personal, and weirdly meditative. The end of the stick tastes faintly bitter, almost like nutmeg crossed with tree bark, and it squeaks ever so slightly against the back of your molars. It's not entirely unpleasant. The repetition has a soothing rhythm. There's no pressure to whiten or polish. No timers, no apps. Just you, a stick, and the fading memory of last night's tooth demon getting smashed like cheap pottery. Of course, it's not a perfect system. Chewing sticks fray unevenly. They can splinter. They're not great for molars, and when you're working with teeth that are already ground down to stubs by sand-filled bread, sometimes the stick just irritates the exposed nerves, but still, it's something. A gesture toward cleanliness, a bite against decay. And these sticks weren't a free-for-all. They came from specific trees, trimmed at certain times, and even sometimes blessed before use. Wealthier households might have a collection of sticks, dried and stored like prized herbs. Some were carved with decorative ends, or dipped in herbal pastes to enhance the experience. They were also surprisingly portable. Slipped into linen belts, tucked into small satchels, or even worn behind the ear like a reed pen. If you were headed off on a journey down the Nile, you brought 3 things: bread, a charm, and your trusty acacia twig. You might even share your stick with a loved one, though frankly it's unclear if that was romantic or just desperate. Hygiene standards were different, so was intimacy. Nothing says love like, "Here, have the other end of my bark toothbrush." And the practice had endurance. Chewing sticks weren't just a fad, they persisted for centuries. Even today, in parts of the world, similar methods are still in use. It turns out the Egyptians were ahead of their time, even when their toothpaste came in a crushed bone and limestone variety. Ah yes, the powders. For those with a little more energy and a stronger gag reflex, brushing might be accompanied by a homemade paste or scrub. Ingredients included powdered ash, ground eggshell, rock salt, dried iris petals, and even the occasional dash of powdered ox hoof. You dip the frayed end of your twig into this gritty dust, wince preemptively, and start scrubbing. Does it help? Somewhat. Does it feel like chewing on ancient cat litter? Absolutely. And still, every time you do it, you're continuing a tradition older than pyramids. You're stepping into a long, splintery legacy of mouth care that predates every ad you've ever seen featuring bright white teeth and impossibly fresh breath. So tonight, as you lay your twig aside and breathe deeply under your linen blanket, think of that humble little stick, frayed at the end, stained with effort, and tucked carefully beside your water bowl. A tiny, bite-sized gesture of hope in a land where survival was no small feat, and neither was keeping your breath tolerable. You close your eyes, your jaw a little cleaner, your heart a little lighter. And outside, under the stars, the wind rustles through the acacia trees. You're beginning to feel like you've tried every trick in the ancient Egyptian dental scroll: twigs, pastes, spells, and holy smoke. But let's not forget one of the biggest challenges of the ancient oral hygiene game: keeping your breath from smelling like a tomb. The Egyptians were obsessed with cleanliness. They shaved their heads to avoid lice, bathed daily, perfumed their armpits, and oiled their skin. So it's no surprise that bad breath was a serious concern, even if most people's diets were working against them from the start. You've already met the culprits: gritty bread, sweet wine, fermented fish paste, onions, garlic, and dried dates, all delicious, all odor-heavy. And without minty gum or breath mints, People had to get creative, which brings us to their most valiant and questionable attempt at freshness. Breath pills. Yes, breath pills. Ancient Egyptian breath mints weren't exactly Altoids. They were handmade pellets of myrrh, cinnamon, frankincense, and, wait for it, ground honey and goat fat. Sometimes carob or dried figs were added for sweetness, and a few recipes even included powdered charcoal. Roll it all into a little ball, dry it in the sun, and voila, ancient tic-tac. You pop one in your mouth and immediately regret it. It tastes like incense and burnt dates. Your jaw tightens, your eyebrows lift, but give it a moment, and the sharp bitterness softens. Now you're left with a vague sweetness and a sort of spicy sweet smoke flavor that isn't terrible but certainly doesn't scream fresh. Historians still argue whether these pills were meant for daily use or reserved for ceremonies and rituals, perhaps used when approaching the gods, making offerings, or trying to impress someone at a feast. And they weren't always swallowed. Some were sucked on. Others were chewed and then spat out, an ancient version of a rinse and expectorate routine. But breath care didn't stop there. Wealthy Egyptians had access to perfumed mouth oils. A few drops swirled around the mouth and spat out supposedly masked even the foulest fish breath. Some even added resin from balsam trees, sticky, sharp, and clingy enough to hang around longer than the smell of your last fermented onion tart. Let's not forget the scrolls that recommended using wine as a mouth rinse. Not the fun, fruity kind. More like wine that had turned sour, vinegary and strong enough to make your tongue curl. Mix in a pinch of natron, the ash salt blend used in mummification, and you've got something between a mouthwash and a dare. And of course, some Egyptians turned to the gods for oral salvation. One scroll records a prayer to Hathor, asking that the breath be like lotus blossoms and not frighten the sacred cat. Now that is a metric. If your breath doesn't scare the temple cat, you're doing something right. Despite their efforts, most Egyptians probably walked around with breath that could knock out a hippo. And considering that nobody brushed their tongue or flossed, and most people's teeth were decaying by age 30, it's fair to assume public conversation required some polite distance. Yet the aspiration was there. They genuinely tried. They chewed herbs like mint, parsley, and juniper. They burned aromatic woods and inhaled the smoke. Some even slept with cloves under their pillows to sweeten the mouth during dreams. Whether it worked or not, it reveals something deeply human: the desire to be pleasant, to be cared for, to not offend, even when your mouth is hosting the ghost of 5 abscesses. So tonight, as you nestle into your bedding, maybe still tasting that goat fat and frankincense pellet you bravely chewed earlier, think about those ancient Egyptians. They didn't have dentists, but they had determination. They didn't have mouthwash, but they had ritual, resourcefulness, and a lot of very strong herbs. You drift off, your breath faintly smoky, your dreams filled with lotus blossoms, and, hopefully, no frightened cats. By now, your breath smells faintly of herbs and honeyed smoke. Your teeth are only half on strike, and you've just about accepted that ancient Egyptian dental care is more endurance sport than science. But don't get too cozy. Today, you're rifling through your healer's scrolls and discovering something truly alarming. Remedies, copied by hand, passed down for centuries, and almost all based on guesses. You see, ancient Egypt had a long tradition of open-source medicine. Remedies were written onto papyrus scrolls, stored in temple libraries, and shared among healers. These collections, like the Ebers papyrus or the Hearst papyrus, were filled with detailed recipes, treatment suggestions, and highly specific instructions. But the results, let's just say consistency wasn't the strong point. You read things like, for a pain in the molar, mix fresh pig's ear with honey and apply to the jaw. Or, grind date pits with charcoal and recite the names of 7 protective spirits. Sometimes there's actual medical reasoning. Other times, it sounds like someone was dared to come up with the weirdest treatment possible. Historians still argue whether these prescriptions were tested methods or just ritual placeholders, a way of giving patients hope rather than relief. You sit beside the healer as he scans the crumbling scroll, tracing lines with a worn reed stylus. He squints, mutters, and then reads aloud a remedy involving crushed tortoiseshell and beer foam. You don't ask questions. You just nod like this makes complete sense, because challenging the scroll is basically challenging the wisdom of the gods, and you've already pushed your luck with that mouse paste. These texts were often copied word for word, even when the healer had no idea what half the ingredients were. One line might say, burn and apply immediately, while the next says, do not burn, or the spirits will be angered. There were contradictions galore, but to the ancient Egyptians, preserving the formula, even if flawed, was more important than understanding every step. That's not to say they didn't experiment. Healers mixed, mashed, boiled, and filtered. They added new herbs to old recipes, substituted hard-to-find ingredients, and occasionally just made educated guesses. If the patient got better, great. If not, well, maybe the gods were testing them. One of the more peculiar entries involves wrapping a tooth in linen soaked with milk and stuffing it into the mouth until the pain goes silent. You don't know what silent pain is, but it sounds both ominous and mildly poetic. Another recommends spitting 3 times into a clay jar and burying it to trap the ache in the ground. Modern dentistry, this is not. Even more confusingly, some remedies were meant to be read, not applied. The very act of reciting the cure was considered part of the cure itself. The spoken word had power, so your healer might read an entire paragraph in a sing-song voice, waggle his fingers dramatically over your face, and then declare the treatment finished, with no physical application at all. You're skeptical, but you're also out of options. The scrolls weren't just functional, they were works of art. Carefully penned in hieratic or hieroglyphic script, adorned with small drawings or divine names. Some had red ink for dangerous sections, black ink for common ones. Reading them wasn't just about information, it was a ritual in itself. Healers kept them wrapped in linen, perfumed, and sometimes even sealed with wax charms. You marvel at the reverence. Every line is treated like holy scripture, even when the line says, place crushed frog bones under the tongue of the sufferer. You're not sure whether you're in a medical office or a spell-casting workshop, and honestly, it's probably both. So tonight, as you curl up under your worn linen blanket, the scroll lying beside your mat, you reflect on how strange and human all of this is. People doing their best with what they had, writing down what might work, hoping it helps the next poor soul. You close your eyes. The ink of the scroll glistens in the firelight. Outside, a priest chants softly to the stars, and inside, you dream of pages, crumbly, smoky, hopeful pages, written by candlelight from mouths just like yours. The next morning, you do something no one in your modern life would even consider remotely restful. You visit a cemetery to learn about teeth. Not just any cemetery, an ancient Egyptian burial site, where archaeologists have uncovered thousands of remains, many still bearing silent witness to a lifetime of chewing grit, suffering abscesses, and surviving on barley and prayers. You're about to let a skull do the talking. Because when it comes to understanding how ancient Egyptians really fared in the dental department, The truth lies in the bones, specifically the jaws. If you've ever wondered what centuries of eating rock-laced bread and sweetened wine do to a population, all you have to do is look at the wear patterns on their molars. You crouch beside a burial pit, real or imagined, staring down at a skull with a permanent grimace. Though, to be fair, that's probably just what happens when your teeth are worn to flat yellow pads. Some have massive cavities, while others have exposed roots or bone loss, so dramatic it looks like someone tried to carve a hole with a spoon. This wasn't rare. It was common, expected even. Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly understood the long-term consequences of their diet, or whether they simply accepted the pain as part of life. Judging by the number of bodies with severe dental disease, it's clear that everyone, rich and poor alike, paid the price for their love of gritty grain. You examine a high-status burial, linen wraps, carefully arranged amulets, maybe a little gold leaf still clinging to the cheekbone, and yet the teeth, just as bad as any laborer's. Cracked, discolored, possibly infected. This noble may have lived in a palace, but her molars still lost the battle against stone-ground flour. One skull in particular has a dental abscess that grew so large it bored a hole through the jawbone. That's not just discomfort. That's debilitating, fever-inducing agony. The kind of pain that keeps you from eating, sleeping, or even thinking clearly. And yet, the person lived long enough for the infection to partially heal, meaning they endured it for weeks, maybe months. There's also a curious case of teeth with visible notches along the edges, tiny U-shaped wear marks believed to come from using the teeth as tools, chewing rope, softening reeds, cracking nutshells. Teeth weren't just for eating. They were tools of the trade, which means the damage wasn't just dietary. It was occupational. Even young skeletons show wear. Teenagers with molars already flattened, canines chipped, and signs of early bone loss. There was no such thing as baby teeth forever. The moment you got a full set, Egypt started sanding them down for you. And then there's the strange inclusion of tooth-related items in burials. You've heard of golden picks and linen-wrapped molars being placed with the dead. But some burials go further. Little carved figurines representing mouths or charms marked with teeth-like engravings. Perhaps they were offerings to gods like Hathor or Bes, asking for relief in the afterlife. Perhaps they were just reminders of the constant pain endured in life. You sit in the silence of the tomb, imagining the lives these people lived. Farmers, priests, artisans, children. Each of them smiled, grimaced, chewed, winced, whispered, kissed, and all with teeth that hurt. And yet they kept going, baking, praying, singing, even inventing ways to mask the smell of oral decay using myrrh and ground lotus petals. There's something oddly comforting in this. You're not alone in your struggle. You're part of a very long, very toothy tradition of people who dealt with dental misery and found ways to carry on. They didn't have dentists, but they had each other. And they left behind stories etched into bone. So tonight, as you lie back and rest your own teeth, clean, brushed, blissfully fluoride protected, think about those who didn't have that luxury. The ones who still laughed, loved, and lived with molars that deserved their own burial chamber. You close your eyes. The memory of that ancient jawbone lingers, not as a horror story, but as a reminder. Even without solutions, humans always look for relief. And sometimes, they leave clues behind for you to find. By now, your mind is full of skeletons and scrolls, and your own jaw seems to throb in sympathy with the ghosts of teeth long gone. But if you think ancient Egyptian adults had it rough, wait until you hear what happened to their kids. Because childhood in Egypt wasn't all lotus flowers and miniature linen tunics. It was also a front-row seat to the early stages of dental decline. Let's start with the obvious. Children's diets. They ate what the adults ate. That means stone-ground bread, chewy dried fruits, and beer mash, all full of grit, sugar, or both. There was no kids' menu in ancient Egypt. Your first tooth pokes through, and the next thing you're chewing on a barley cake that could double as a whetstone. Archaeological remains of children show startlingly advanced toothwear for their age. 6-year-olds with worn-down molars. 8-year-olds with enamel stripped nearly smooth. By their teens, many had already developed cavities and bone infections. You barely had a full set of adult teeth before they were under siege from daily life. Historians still argue whether this wear was due solely to food, or if children were also used to help with tasks involving their teeth, chewing soft materials, holding reeds, even softening leather strips. Their mouths weren't just for eating. They were tiny multi-tools, pressed into service by necessity. And then there were the teething years. For infants, this meant drooling through a world of herbal compresses, clay amulets, and whispered prayers. Some texts suggest rubbing crushed herbs like mint, garlic, or even crushed rose petals onto the baby's gums to ease the pain. Others recommend hanging protective charms around the neck, especially ones carved in the shape of Bes, the dwarf god who guarded homes and chased away evil spirits, and presumably toothaches. One particularly charming and vaguely terrifying tradition involved the use of tooth-saving amulets, small ivory or faience tokens shaped like teeth that were strung onto necklaces or sewn into baby clothes. These weren't just decorative. They were meant to keep the child's real teeth from falling out, or to ensure the new ones came in properly. Superstition, yes, but also a comforting sign that people truly cared about their children's health, even when they had little control over it. It's not hard to imagine a mother in a modest Theban home, sitting beside her child at night, pressing a warm cloth to a swollen cheek, singing softly while the child whimpers from a sore gum. She doesn't have antibiotics. She doesn't have teething gel. But she does have a bundle of herbs, a carved charm, and centuries of tradition whispering in her ear. There's evidence that older children were also included in oral rituals, taught to chew cleaning sticks, rinse with herbal wine, and recite purification chants. They didn't always understand why their mouths hurt, but they knew what to do when it did. Just like their parents, they endured and adapted. Even in death, children were often buried with tokens of dental care, miniature sticks, tiny pouches of powder, or small figurines representing healing gods. It speaks to the tenderness their families felt and the belief that pain didn't end with life. It followed you to the next world, unless properly addressed. One burial site in particular revealed a child no older than 9, buried with a small clay bowl filled with what appeared to be powdered mint and natron, a personal breath-freshening kit perhaps. Or maybe just the hopeful gesture of a parent who wanted their child to enter the afterlife without suffering. So tonight, as you nestle into your soft pillow, give a moment's thought to those children, brave, tender, and strong, whose tiny teeth carried them through the rough beginning of life in ancient Egypt. Their smiles, brief and bright, were made with the same hope we still carry today, to be seen, loved, and remembered, even through the pain. Outside, the stars over the Nile shimmer faintly. Somewhere in the past, a mother hums to a child, and a carved charm swings gently above their sleeping face. The desert night cools your face, and your jaw, though sore, has found its own rhythm. Ache, pause, ache. But there's still one more dental curiosity waiting to unnerve you. You're helping prepare a burial today, and tucked into the wrappings of the dead is something oddly familiar. A dental kit. Not for the living, but for the afterlife. Yes, The dead needed toothpaste too, or at least the ancient Egyptians thought they might. Among the many curious burial customs of the period was the inclusion of oral care tools in tombs. Toothpicks, powders, and little bundles of chewing sticks, all placed carefully beside the body as if to say, "You'll want this where you're going." It may sound absurd. What use is a toothbrush when you're, well, a mummy? But this gesture wasn't about practicality. It was symbolic. Just as the deceased needed food, drink, clothing, and amulets to navigate the afterlife, they also needed the tools to maintain bodily order, and in Egyptian thinking, oral hygiene was part of that harmony. You watch as the embalmers work. The body is carefully cleaned, anointed, and wrapped. In some high-status burials, they even stuffed the mouth with cloth, resin, or occasionally, yes, a linen ball dipped in fragrant oil and natron, the same stuff used for preserving the body. Why? To keep the breath pure in the afterlife, so the deceased could speak sacred names without offending the gods with spiritual halitosis. Historians still argue whether these post-mortem dental practices were purely symbolic, or whether they were intended to address real decay that occurred during the embalming process. Either way, the result is clear. Teeth mattered, even in death. Some mummies were buried with packets of dental powder made from dried herbs and crushed minerals. Others had small spoons and scoops, like those you've used yourself, included among their jewelry and cosmetics. And in rare cases, embalmers seem to have reinserted fallen teeth into the jaw using resin or linen padding. Not for comfort, obviously, but for aesthetic and spiritual completeness. Because here's the thing. The ancient Egyptian afterlife wasn't just some floaty spiritual realm. It was physical, tangible. You walked, ate, spoke, sang, and, presumably, chewed. And so, just as you needed a staff to walk with, or sandals to wear, you also needed your teeth to be intact, or at least symbolically present. One particularly fascinating tomb, belonging to a minor noble, contained a tiny jar labeled with hieroglyphs, indicating it was for mouth cleaning. Inside were traces of powdered natron, cinnamon, and crushed peppermint leaves. Either this was the world's oldest breath freshener, or someone wanted to make really sure the deceased didn't embarrass themselves at a divine banquet. You step back from the burial chamber, wiping sweat from your brow, and imagine what it must be like to care so much about one's presentation, even after death, that someone made sure your molars were secured and your breath metaphorically sweetened. There's a certain comfort in that, a sense of dignity. Even when your earthly pain is over, the people around you go the extra mile to honor your mouth. The same mouth that told stories, recited prayers, kissed children goodnight, and of course, suffered silently through decades of chewing pebbled barley. And so, as you lie back tonight, the image lingers. A mummy tucked in tight, mouth slightly agape, a small gold pick nestled beside their ribs. They are ready to face eternity with something resembling a smile. And even if that smile is chipped, cracked, or entirely reconstructed with linen and resin, it carries with it a strange kind of hope. Outside, the sands whisper across the tomb's sealed door. Inside, the scent of myrrh and natron hangs in the still air. And somewhere, in a world just beyond this one, someone brushes their ghostly teeth and smiles. You stretch, roll your jaw gently, and remind yourself that you're still among the living, for now. But if today's stories are anything to go by, the ancient Egyptians weren't content to stop their dental creativity at gold picks or afterlife kits. No, now it's time for a tale that walks the tightrope between myth and medicine. The legend of the hippopotamus tooth dagger. Yes, you heard that right. There's an old claim, found scribbled in obscure corners of ancient texts and echoed through whispers in scholarly circles, that some warriors, or healers depending on who's telling it, carried blades made from hippo teeth, sometimes said to be used in dental procedures or rituals. Whether this was literal, symbolic, or the ancient equivalent of an inside joke, historians still argue with great enthusiasm and probably gritted teeth about its truth. Let's take a closer look. Hippopotamus ivory was highly prized in ancient Egypt. Stronger and more durable than elephant ivory, it was used to craft everything from combs to amulets to ceremonial blades. The hippo wasn't just a resource, it was a symbolic powerhouse, both feared and revered. In fact, Taweret, the protective goddess of childbirth, had the head of a hippopotamus and was often invoked in household magic. So it stands to reason that something as personal and painful as dentistry might also call upon the hippo's power. Enter the dagger. Some stories tell of tools used in temple rituals shaped from hippo tusks, sharpened to fine points and carved with protective spells. These tools weren't daggers in the battlefield sense. They were implements of precision, or at least that's what we like to tell ourselves. In the right hands, perhaps they were used to scrape infected gum tissue, lance abscesses, or even carve out a decaying tooth. In the wrong hands, they were probably just very dramatic toothpicks. Of course, there's no definitive evidence that anyone ever successfully performed surgery with one of these. But artifacts made from hippopotamus teeth have been found in medical contexts, suggesting they at least carried symbolic power. Maybe the tool itself wasn't meant to cut, but to invoke strength. Maybe it sat beside the patient during a healing spell, or was waved over a suffering jaw as a kind of metaphysical floss. You picture it now, a healer dressed in linen, holding an ornately carved ivory dagger over your swollen cheek, whispering words in the old tongue, drawing a protective circle in the air. The blade glints in the firelight, more talisman than tool, and somewhere deep in your brain, the pain backs off. Out of respect or fear, you're not sure. But there's another possibility. Some think the dagger idea may have come from misunderstandings in translation. Ancient texts are notoriously slippery. The same word might mean sharp instrument, ceremonial tool, or defensive charm, depending on the context. So maybe the hippo dagger wasn't for cutting flesh at all. Maybe it was meant to cut spiritual bonds, sever curses, or silence the metaphorical tooth demon before it could dig in. Even so, the visual sticks. You, clutching a linen bundle in your lap, staring wide-eyed as a healer approaches with a gleaming piece of hippo ivory shaped like a fang from the gods. Whether it was meant to heal or to scare the pain away, you can't deny. It's effective. You're not even sure your molar still hurts, or if your brain has simply decided to focus on the much larger tooth now looming toward your face. So tonight, as you lie down and rest your jaw, still sore, still swollen, but definitely still attached, you think of that dagger, of the animal it came from, both feared and worshipped, of the stories passed down through centuries about rituals, healing, and the razor-thin line between courage and desperation. And somewhere, in the dry breeze beyond your hut, you swear you hear a deep, toothy grunt echo across the reeds. If by this point you thought you'd already heard the worst of ancient Egyptian dental remedies, let me kindly assure you, the descent continues. Tonight's delightful entry in the Mouth Misery Museum features an unlikely combination of ingredients, garlic and goat hoof, mashed together into what the ancient scrolls promise is a soothing poultice for aching teeth. It's unclear who first thought, you know what would really calm down this exposed nerve? Goat foot soup applied directly to the jaw. But someone did, and they wrote it down, and they passed it on. And now, you are here, reclined on a woven mat, while a healer with very expressive eyebrows stirs a steaming bowl of garlic goatfoot paste with intense focus. Let's break down the recipe. First, the garlic. That one almost makes sense. Garlic has natural antibacterial properties and was revered by many ancient cultures for its ability to fight infection. Egyptians ate it regularly. Laborers especially were known to munch on cloves for stamina. So the leap from keeps me awake to might cure my face isn't a huge one. Now the hoof. That's where it gets dicey. Goat hoof was usually boiled down to a kind of gelatinous mash, probably full of collagen and not much else. In theory, the sticky, dense texture could serve as a base for herbal infusions. In practice, it smells like wet sandals and regret. Historians still argue whether the hoof had medicinal purpose or was simply added for consistency. Some ancient recipes treat it as a filler, others as a softening agent for fire mouth, a phrase that appears in more than one scroll. Together, this mixture formed a jaw paste that was supposed to be slathered along the cheeks, sometimes with a linen wrap to hold it in place. You didn't brush it on so much as stick it on and pray. So here you are, cheeks slick with a paste that smells like something a temple cat might reject. The healer stands over you proudly. He's done this before. He's humming softly, a kind of prayer, or maybe just a distraction from the fact that goat hoof is now slowly melting into your pores. And yet, you start to feel something, a subtle numbing, a warmth, maybe from the garlic, maybe from the placebo effect, or maybe it's just your nerves giving up entirely. Whatever it is, the pressure eases. For the first time in days, your mouth feels quiet. You don't move. You don't blink. You certainly don't speak, lest the paste starts sliding off your jaw like a tired pancake. But you let yourself believe, just for a moment, that the cure might be working. Of course, not everyone used the garlic hoof combo. There were regional variations. Some recipes swapped hoof for mashed fig, or garlic for fermented leeks. The goal was always the same: reduce swelling, numb pain, and pacify whatever spiritual entity was currently gnawing on your bicuspid. Some even recommended chanting the names of protective animals while the paste set: hippopotamus, crocodile, ibis, believing the spiritual essence of these creatures could fortify the body. And if you think about it, it's not all that different from today's ritual of playing whale music during a massage and calling it therapeutic. The Egyptians understood that pain needed both physical and emotional attention. That healing wasn't just about ingredients, it was about context, about being seen, being soothed, being told that you weren't alone in your suffering. That even if your jaw looked like it had been stung by a wasp the size of Ra's chariot, someone cared enough to boil a goat's foot for you. So, tonight, as you lie very still, with your herbal hoof compress slowly drying into a flaky crust, feel the strange comfort of ancient compassion. You're not in a hospital. You're not surrounded by sterile tools. But you're being cared for, in the best way they know how, and that counts for something. Outside, the torches flicker. The healer hums, and inside, your mouth is quiet. Blessedly, beautifully quiet. You wake with the faint crunch of dried goat hoof falling from your jaw like ancient pastry flakes, and as you sit up slowly, careful not to move too fast in case something cracks, you remember the one ingredient we haven't properly dealt with yet. Something so infamous, so versatile, so thoroughly disgusting that it deserves its own spotlight. Crocodile dung. Yes, it's time. Let's talk about how the ancient Egyptians somehow decided that the best thing to rub on their bodies, or in this case, into their gums, was something scooped from the Nile's angriest resident. You might already know that crocodile dung had a surprisingly broad resume. It was used in fertility treatments, contraceptives, facial masks, and even sun protection, because when you have no SPF 30, you improvise. But somewhere in the fever dream of Egyptian medical history, someone decided to try it out on teeth. The logic? Questionable. But to them, crocodiles were powerful creatures, symbols of divine protection, aggression, and strength. If the crocodile was a feared guardian of the Nile, perhaps its waist held some of that sacred potency. Historians still argue whether its use was symbolic, antibacterial, or just traditional inertia. The ancient version of, well, it didn't kill grandma. So here you are, jaw still tender, being presented with a small ball of greenish-brown paste in a hollowed-out palm nut shell. You're told it's been mixed with acacia sap, natron, and a little frankincense to balance the scent, which frankly doesn't work. It smells like a swamp lit on fire. Your healer smiles. You don't. The application is invasive. A small reed spoon dabs it along your gums, and the burning begins almost immediately. Not because it's hot, because it's alive. Or at least, it feels like it. Your whole mouth tingles. You consider that this could be pain relief, or it could be your brain launching a full-scale rebellion. And yet, there were those who swore by it. Some scrolls even suggest it was used in tooth whitening, a fact that modern science has yet to fully unpack. How anything that color could whiten is anyone's guess. Perhaps it worked the way ancient eyeliner did, by contrast. Nothing makes your teeth look brighter than brushing them with a smear of something so vile even the temple dogs walk away. It wasn't just a lower-class remedy either. Traces of crocodile dung have been found in cosmetic and medical containers, buried with the wealthy. It wasn't an accident. It was intentional, part of a broader belief system in which natural substances, even unpleasant ones, held power when combined with ritual and respect. Sometimes the dung was burned into ash before being added to tooth powder. Other times it was dried and ground, or, on bold days, used fresh. The more you think about it, the more you admire the sheer nerve of ancient Egyptian healers. They looked at a crocodile and thought, yes, all of it. Even the leftovers. It's worth noting that many Egyptian treatments were part of layered therapies. A crocodile dung poultice might be paired with a chant, followed by incense, followed by a sweet rinse. Not because they thought one alone would work, but because everything worked together. It was the experience, the ritual, the belief that mattered as much as the ingredients. So tonight, as you lie back with your breath now containing notes of Nile horror, consider this. Ancient Egyptians may not have had dentists, but they had dedication. No pain was too great, no remedy too strange, no beast too sacred or smelly to ignore. They chased relief with equal parts courage, creativity, and very little sense of smell. The fire flickers low. Your head rests on linen still faintly scented with garlic, hoof, and crocodile offerings. And you drift off, comforted by the knowledge that, somehow, it's working. You've braved the garlic. You've tolerated the goat hoof. You've, impossibly, survived the crocodile dung. And yet, somewhere in the Egyptian medical scrolls, tucked between recipes for treating foot fungus and warding off scorpions, lies one final touch of dental opulence, the golden smile. It turns out that even in a world where most teeth were ground to gravel by age 30, some ancient Egyptians may have sported dental bling, what modern headlines breathlessly refer to as pharaonic grills. Yes, we're talking about gold dental work, inserted not just for healing, but possibly for aesthetic swagger. Let's be clear. This isn't the same as modern crowns or orthodontics. This was early, experimental, and likely symbolic. Archaeologists have uncovered skulls with gold wire fixtures that seem to bind loose teeth to neighboring ones. Others suggest that gold caps may have been placed over broken or unsightly teeth to preserve appearance, especially in death. Historians still argue whether these were used while the person was alive or applied posthumously as part of burial beautification. Either way, it raises a wonderful, ridiculous possibility. Some ancient Egyptians may have walked around with literal gold in their mouths, smiling through the pain with a glint that screamed, "Yes, I choose sand for breakfast and I shine." You imagine the scene, a mid-tier official standing in a temple courtyard, lips pulled slightly apart, revealing a tooth glimmer that catches the eye of a passing scribe. Was it envy? Was it admiration? Or was it just a brief distraction from the fact that nearly everyone's breath could wilt lotus blossoms? The use of gold in the mouth wasn't just vanity. Gold was sacred. It represented the flesh of the gods, especially Ra, the sun god. It was incorruptible, resistant to decay, and associated with eternity. So to place gold in your mouth, whether as a cap, a wire, or a buried offering, was to declare your desire to be preserved, purified, and maybe even divine. Some skulls show small holes where wire may have held a loose tooth in place. Others have curious wear patterns that suggest something harder than enamel was involved. Could it have been functional? Possibly. Could it have been uncomfortable? Almost certainly. Imagine trying to chew barley cakes with an early metal bracket slicing into your cheek. The Egyptian orthodontist's motto was probably, "It will look good in your tomb." Interestingly, this practice doesn't seem to have been widespread. Only a handful of remains have ever shown this kind of dental modification, suggesting it was rare, experimental, or reserved for the elite. But the idea caught on in lore. Later societies, including Greeks and Romans, echoed the notion of gold in the mouth as both healing and status symbol. And there's more. In some temples, priests believed that prayers offered with a purified mouth had more power. A clean, perfumed, and, even better, golden mouth was a vessel worthy of divine words. That's not just oral hygiene, that's sacred engineering. So tonight, as you lay back, your gums a little sore, and your mind a little dazed, you picture yourself with a modest little gold cap on your front tooth. Not because it helps the pain, not because it fixes the damage, but because it's the closest you've come to owning a piece of the sun. Outside, the Nile shimmers in the moonlight, and somewhere nearby a fellow patient quietly curses the day bread met granite. You smile, just slightly, and in the dark something gleams. The gold tooth glimmer fades into memory, but your jaw reminds you, none of this has been gentle. Which brings us now to a scene so grim, so impossibly courageous, that it deserves a place of its own in this long parade of oral misery. Jaw surgery in a mud hut. That's right. When prayers failed, pastes burned, and crocodile dung didn't do the trick. There were moments, rare, desperate moments, when ancient Egyptians attempted something that can only be described as prehistoric, maxillofacial intervention. And no, you're not going to like it. There's archaeological evidence suggesting that in some extreme cases, infected portions of jawbone may have been cut away or scraped to relieve pressure from abscesses. This wasn't widespread. It wasn't common. It may not even have been intentional in every case. But it happened. And it likely happened with the kind of tools you wouldn't use to open a melon today. Imagine it. You're lying on a woven reed mat. A healer kneels beside you with a bronze blade that's been heated in a clay oven. There's no anesthetic, no antiseptic, no gloves, just incense in the corner, a bowl of bitter wine, and someone muttering a prayer so low you can barely tell if it's for healing or mercy. The healer places one hand on your jaw, the other on the blade. You take a swig of wine, then another. Then he begins. Historians still argue whether these procedures were true surgeries or more like emergency interventions. There are skulls with cleanly cut sections of jawbone, healed over, meaning the person survived. Others show signs of chipping, burning, or attempted drainage of large oral cysts. Whatever the case, it wasn't done for cosmetic reasons. It was done to stop the pain from becoming death. And incredibly, in some cases, it worked. Survival rates? Unknown. Infection risk? Astronomical. But in a time without antibiotics, just living through such an ordeal was enough to qualify you as semi-divine. You might limp away, face swollen, tongue numb, half your teeth gone, but alive. Tools were simple: bronze knives, obsidian flakes, copper chisels. Sometimes a reed splint was inserted into the mouth afterward to keep the wound open for draining. Other times the jaw was wrapped tightly in linen soaked with wine, natron, and powdered herbs. You weren't so much recovering as you were re-entering society with new oral battle scars. There's one mummy, nicknamed by scholars the Patient of Deir el-Medina, whose jaw shows evidence of surgical intervention on both sides, as if someone tried once, failed, and came back for round two. It's unclear whether he lived long after the second attempt, but the bones show partial healing, meaning he didn't die immediately, which in context counts as miraculous. Of course, this wasn't always a medical choice. Some believe these procedures were ritual as much as physical, intended to cut out spiritual impurity as much as infected tissue. The overlap between surgery and ceremony was fluid. One might start with a knife and end with a chant, or vice versa. And let's not forget the setting. This isn't happening in a marble amphitheater. You're not being wheeled into a sterile room with soft music and anesthesia. You're under a canopy of woven reeds, the sun bleeding through, a chicken clucking outside, and two cats watching with eerie stillness as your molar is carved out like a bad omen. You groan. The healer whispers a prayer to Imhotep, the deified architect and physician. Someone drips wine into your mouth. You swallow. You survive. So tonight, as you lie in your much softer bed, maybe with a fan humming gently and a toothbrush within reach, give a nod to the unknown souls who endured jaw surgery without flinching, who lay in mud huts under blazing skies and trusted in blades, prayers, and fate. The air grows quiet. The river flows, and in the dark, you feel gratitude settle into your bones, deeper than enamel, stronger than pain. You rest your head and think, surely they found ways to cope. And they did, but not in the ways you'd expect. Because what we modern minds might mistake for ancient stoicism or artistic serenity was, in many cases, just people quietly enduring an endless parade of oral agony. So let's talk about that. Why everyone looked so serious in those ancient Egyptian portraits. Think of those famous wall paintings. The men with perfectly shaved heads, the women with elaborately braided wigs, everyone facing sideways with the exact same half smile, or more accurately, no smile at all. There's a timeless dignity in those expressions, a calm composure carved into limestone and painted in mineral pigments. But what if that wasn't just aesthetic choice? What if everyone just hurt? Because if you were an ancient Egyptian over the age of 20, odds are high that at least one part of your face hurt nearly all the time. And when you've got abscesses under your cheekbones, impacted molars, raw nerves exposed from decades of chewing gravel bread and drinking clay beer, you're probably not grinning for your tomb painting. Historians still argue whether these expressions were meant to reflect idealized serenity or simply mirrored what people actually looked like most of the time. After all, a wide smile would have revealed missing teeth, exposed gums, or worse. So maybe it wasn't just formality. It was practicality. And it's not just in art. Surviving letters and poems sometimes reference the ache in the head that stings with biting, or the silence of the elder whose mouth fails him. Not dramatic laments, just passing mentions. Dental pain wasn't treated as tragedy. It was background noise. It was the wind in the palm trees, the grit in the bread, the throbbing you didn't talk about because everyone else had it too. Even the elite weren't exempt. The skull of Ramses II, one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, shows severe dental problems. His molars were damaged, his gums inflamed. Some scholars believe his cause of death may have been related to a dental infection that spread to his heart. The most powerful man in the land, taken down by a tooth. And yet, art continued to depict him, and everyone else, with that same composed look. Chin high, eyes focused. Mouth neutral, no sign of pain. Maybe it was dignity. Maybe it was denial, or maybe it was just the cultural equivalent of smile through it, and maybe no one will ask if you're chewing on one side only. You sit in a shaded courtyard, watching a stonemason chip away at a new wall relief. The figure he carves has the same straight nose, the same calm eyes, and a mouth set in the unbothered line of a person who either has divine grace or just doesn't want to talk about the fact that their back molar is actively trying to end them. You catch your own reflection in the water basin nearby. Face dusty, lips pressed into a familiar line. You're not smiling either. But you understand now. It's not coldness. It's coexistence with pain. It's learning how to walk beside discomfort and still show up to make offerings, to attend rituals, to build something that will last thousands of years. So tonight, as the firelight dances across your sleeping chamber walls, and the temple bells ring out the evening hymn, let yourself settle into that same expression. Calm, enduring. Eyes half-lidded from wine and fatigue, mouth soft, not grinning. Not grimacing, just quiet. The same way they were, thousands of years ago, as the stars wheeled over the Nile and the ache behind the cheekbone faded into the background once more. You've made it through grinding bread, dental spells, crocodile dung and jaw surgery. But the Egyptians had one more twist to throw at you. Because even in death, you weren't done dealing with your teeth. Let's talk about what happened when you died with a mouthful of problems. Because in ancient Egypt, your journey didn't end with your last breath. No, that was just the beginning of your trip to the afterlife. And it turns out, the afterlife had opinions about oral hygiene. The ancient Egyptian vision of the afterlife, known as the Field of Reeds, was a perfect version of Earth. You farmed without toil, ate without scarcity, and lived forever in comfort. But there was a catch. You had to show up whole. Not just spiritually whole, physically whole. That meant your body had to be intact enough for your soul to recognize it. Limbs, eyes, heart, and yes, even teeth. So what did the embalmers do with your broken mouth? In high-status mummifications, special care was taken with the face. If teeth were missing, sometimes they were wrapped separately in linen and placed near the head. Other times, gaps in the jaw were filled with resin or linen plugs to make it appear more complete. Some skulls show signs of false teeth inserted post-mortem, not to restore function, of course, but to preserve the illusion of wholeness for the divine judgment to come. Historians still argue whether these practices were symbolic or simply cosmetic. Were they worried about chewing in the next world? Or were they trying to meet a religious requirement, showing up at the court of Osiris with all your parts accounted for? Regardless, teeth mattered. The opening of the mouth ceremony, one of the most important funerary rituals, involved touching the mummy's mouth with sacred tools to restore the senses in the afterlife. Taste, speech, breath. If your mouth was damaged, or worse, foul, it could affect your ability to recite spells or speak your name before the gods. You couldn't plead your case to Osiris with swollen gums and missing incisors. Imagine it. Your body laid out, wrapped tight in fine linen, amulets tucked into every fold. A priest, wearing the mask of Anubis, leans over you and touches your lips with a ritual blade, shaped like a fishtail, or sometimes a small adze, intended to reopen your senses for the eternal journey ahead. You don't flinch, you can't, but you feel it, symbolically. And then, your mouth is yours again. Even if, in life, you hadn't been able to use it without wincing for decades. For the average person, mummification was simpler, but the intention remained. Your family might place a chewed twig, a cloth bundle of tooth powder, or even a small jar of oil near your head, just in case, just to be safe. Because no one wanted to arrive in the afterlife with the spiritual equivalent of morning breath. Some tombs even included oral hygiene hymns, short lines about purity of breath, sweetness of voice, and the ability to speak true names. Words were power in ancient Egypt. And power required a working mouth. So tonight, as you prepare for sleep, imagine not just closing your eyes, but stepping into a sacred place beyond this one. A field of waving reeds, a gentle wind, a sky full of gods. You carry nothing but yourself, and whatever the embalmers gave you to make sure you'd be heard. Maybe a gold pick, maybe a blessed paste, maybe just the memory of a clean mouth and a full heart. Because in ancient Egypt, even the afterlife respected a well-tended molar. The Nile wind rustles the papyrus leaves as the stars begin to fade into the slow burn of another Egyptian dawn. You sit quietly, not chewing, not rinsing, not wincing, just letting the stillness soak in. After all the root powders, jaw drills, and golden picks, the most precious remedy of all turns out to be this: silence. This late in your ancient journey, the pain is familiar, predictable even, a dull companion. But you've come to understand something that Egyptians knew better than most. Ritual is its own medicine. The repeated brushing with a twig, the swishing of bitter rinse, the wrapping of linen soaked in herbs. None of it guaranteed relief, but all of it gave comfort, a structure for the suffering. You remember now how deeply the Egyptians valued rhythm and order, ma'at, the divine balance of all things. Illness, including dental pain, was seen as a disturbance of that harmony. And so every ritual, from cleaning to chanting, wasn't just about removing infection. It was about restoring equilibrium, bringing your body and soul back into alignment with the world. And this idea of pain as imbalance meant that healing wasn't just the job of the body, it was the job of your spirit. Your words, your actions, your mouth wasn't just for chewing. It was for prayer, for naming the gods, for honoring the dead. A clean mouth meant a clear voice, a voice the gods could hear. Even today, the artifacts endure. Tiny jars of breath sweetener, delicately carved toothpicks, fragments of papyrus filled with inked prayers to soothe a sore gum. These weren't thrown together. They were crafted with care, with belief. Every piece says, "We knew this mattered." And maybe that's what you take away most of all. Not that their dental care was effective. Let's be honest, it often wasn't. But that it was meaningful. That in the middle of life's many hardships, the Egyptians paused, looked pain in the face, and offered it a balm mixed with herbs, minerals, and hope. So tonight, as you lean your head back, jaw relaxed, breathing steady, let that quiet thought settle in. You're part of a very long, very tender story. A story of people trying, fumbling, guessing, and still managing to leave behind proof that they cared, even for the humble tooth. The wind cools. The fire crackles low. And you rest, knowing that balance, however brief, is still possible. It's near midnight now in your imagined hut on the Nile's edge. The rush of the river is a lullaby, constant and soft, whispering through papyrus stems and washing against the mud brick banks. Your jaw is quiet, at least for now. There's no garlic paste burning your gums, no golden toothpick clinking between your fingers, just the sound of breathing. Yours. Steady. You've done something that few people in history ever managed. You've truly outlasted ancient Egyptian dental care. You've come out the other side, still intact, still chewing gently, and perhaps more importantly, still wondering. Because even after all you've seen and felt, one question lingers like the tang of natron at the back of your tongue. Did they know how bad it was? Did they truly feel the depth of their own discomfort? Or was it simply woven into life like the sun and the sand? Historians still argue about that. Some believe pain was normalized, not named. That the slow grind of discomfort was just part of growing older in a land where the earth cracked beneath your feet, and the gods watched everything from above. Others believe they did understand, deeply, and responded in the only way they could, with ritual, with spells, and with acts of love disguised as routines. A mother crushing mint for her child's aching mouth. A priest scribbling another chant to drive away the worm of pain. A mason burying a little linen pouch of tooth powder beside his wife's body, not because he thought it would help, but because it would have mattered to her. This is where you find the real magic of it all. Not in the results, but in the care. In the insistence that even something as small as a toothache deserved attention, deserved reverence. In the belief that you were worth soothing, no matter how grim the materials or absurd the recipe. So as you lie there, jaw still for once, your breath warm in the cool air, the flicker of oil lamp shadows dancing against plastered walls, let yourself believe it too. You are worth the ritual. You are worth the remedy. You are worth the gold. Even if your breath smells like last night's garlic hoof stew, the fire's nearly out. The stars have turned slightly in the sky, and outside, the Nile keeps flowing, just like it did for them. You've made it to the quietest part of the night. When the world is so still, it feels like time itself is holding its breath. The embers have burned down to their last orange sigh, and even the palm trees stand motionless in the warm hush. This is the hour when dreams stretch the farthest and the past feels closest. And as your mind floats gently across the sands of memory, you reach the final, most mysterious corner of ancient Egyptian dental life, the illusion of the smiling scribe. You've seen the paintings. A seated figure, legs folded, stylus in hand, mouth turned up ever so slightly. A serene smirk, a portrait of peace, of education, of contentment. But here's the thing. Many of these scribes, when their remains are examined, reveal horrendous dental trauma. Cracked incisors, abscesses, cavities so deep they look like tunnels. So why the smile? Was it real? Was it artistic invention? Or was it something else entirely? Historians still argue whether these expressions were idealizations or social signals. Scribes were respected, part of the educated class, often linked to temples or administration. Their smiles may have represented what society expected of them: calm, clever, in control. But perhaps, hidden beneath that calm was something far more relatable: the practiced smile of someone living in pain. Think about it. You're a scribe, bent over scrolls day after day, your molars slowly grinding themselves into smooth pebbles. Every meal hurts. Every swallow of wine stings. And yet, you're expected to show poise, to teach, to document, to record the names of the pharaohs in perfect ink. So you learn to smile, not because it doesn't hurt, but because it always hurts, and you've simply adapted. And that, somehow, is beautiful, because it shows us how people endured, how they found grace amid grit, how they took something brutal and shaped it into something noble. Their mouths may have been broken, but their spirits were not. You, lying in the soft hush of night, feel that truth settle gently over your shoulders. You've walked their path, chewed their bread, swished their herbal horror rinses, whispered their prayers, and through it all, you've kept moving forward, just like they did, gracefully, seriously, maybe even a little bit sarcastically. So the next time you see that half-smiling scribe, remember what that curve really meant. Not peace, not ease, but strength. The kind of strength that laughs quietly, even when the roots of your teeth feel like they're about to explode. The oil lamp flickers once more, casting the final light against the wall. You're nearly asleep. The Nile flows on, so here you are. The last bend in the river. The fire is out. The hut is quiet, and your jaw, miraculously, mercifully, is still. Not because it's healed, but because you've finally stopped fighting it. After all, this has never been a story about conquering pain. It's been a story about living with it. And now, with nothing left to prove, nothing more to chew, we arrive at the grand conclusion. Ancient Egyptian dentistry was mostly bad. Objectively, it was inventive, determined, often brave, but ultimately gritty in every sense. But that's not what makes it fascinating. What makes it beautiful, oddly, comfortingly beautiful, is that they tried anyway. Every splintered tooth, every burned herb, every whispered chant into a mouthful of vinegar and ash was an act of hope, not science. Not certainty, just hope. They knew they didn't have the tools. They knew the pain would probably come back. They knew their molars were wearing away like the limestone walls they painted on. And still, they chewed. They prayed. They smiled, even if it hurt. Maybe that's the best anyone can do. As your eyes close tonight, you imagine yourself walking beside the Nile at dusk. The sky is gold. The air smells of date palms and old river water. You carry a small pouch tied to your waist. Inside, a twig brush, a bit of powdered mint, a tiny amulet shaped like a tooth. Ahead of you, a temple looms, carved stone and shadow. Behind you, the dust of generations. You pause, run your tongue over your teeth, still whole, still yours. And you smile, just a little. Because somewhere deep in history, someone did the same. And now, it's time to drift. And now, everything slows. The Nile quiets to a hush, a soft thread in the distance. The air is warm, still, and filled with the gentle scent of crushed mint and sun-baked linen. You breathe in deeply and exhale just as slowly. Let your jaw unclench. Let your tongue settle against the roof of your mouth. Let every part of your face soften. You've made it. The rituals are done. The incense has faded. Even the scribes are asleep now, their styluses set down, their scrolls rolled neatly away. The fire is just an ember, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. You're lying on a thick mat, soft with woven reeds, a blanket tucked under your chin. The world no longer needs your attention. You've done enough. You've learned enough. You've laughed quietly through your teeth enough. Now, there is nothing left to do but rest. The stars above the Nile blink softly, like ancient eyes watching over you, not judging, not measuring, just watching, keeping time as the river flows endlessly forward. Somewhere far away, a hippo snorts in the shallows. A frog chirps, and the wind brushes past the edge of the door, cool and kind. Let go. Let the rhythm of breath and the softness of stillness take over. Let your body remember what it feels like to be weightless, to be pain-free, to be cared for, to be held just for a while in the calm embrace of history. You are safe. You are still. You are drifting. Sweet dreams.